boy, do we have a good match for you guys.
This is an incredible match for us to kick off with today. So we will head over to the players area, and we can reveal that the first round today will be between European international champion Eric Rios and Lou?
Chongjun Peng, again, a firm favorite, really popular online. And, you know, you've already mentioned Eric Rios has won the European International Championships. And I remember Eric coming up through juniors from the European region that Lee and I are from, and coming up through seniors, and was always a really well-established player. And then he was always kind of getting those top cuts, but never the victories, you know? And then this season has just come out on top, won a regional. That wasn't, you know, enough. Let's go win an internationals. And you know for sure that Eric is going to be here saying, hey, I want a World Championship trophy on my cabinet as well. On the opposing side for Chongjun as well, this player won the Salt Lake City Regionals earlier this year and got top 8 at NAIC. I think the most important thing to talk about with these players is both of them got these top finishes using that Rinya Sun team that we talked about. And oh, look, Lee, no surprises here. It's a Rinya Sun mirror.
This is going to be one for us to kick off with today. But a really good one because both players, like you said, are so comfortable with this team concept. You know, they've both played it to very successful results in previous events. Eric, obviously, we've already mentioned the European International Champion, and then we've got Chongjun with that regional win and an incredible finish at the North American International Championships.
I mean, this is already the best day of Pokemon. You have got these two players who are well-versed, well-established with these key teams facing off against each other, and you might be thinking, hey, a mirror match, that, you know, how can that be super interesting and engaging? But the key thing to look out for as a viewer is what are the differences between these teams? What are the items? What are the speeds? How are they trained? And obviously their move pool, we talked about the flexibility of some of these Pokemon like Grimmsnarl and Incineroar, but also Pokemon like Gastrodon and Charizard, and even the Zacian we've seen have a few wild choices lately with things like Quick Attack. How have they been adapted for the world stage? And is that going to give one player the advantage over the other?
I think you nail it here, Lou. I think it is those little changes that these players have made, the tweaks that they've made to the individual Pokemon, either how they've been trained or their move choices or item choices, and that's really what's going to sway it for each player. And I think going into game one, that both players will probably be quite conservative, want to find out as much information about the other player's team as possible to kind of figure out a cohesive game plan to go into the rest of the set. You know, we're being treated here, Lou. We've said all along how much we like Gastrodon, and for us today, we've got 2 Gastrodons to kick off with.
It's just an amazing show, having, you know, that Pokemon out front and center. Whether we'll see it or not will have to be determined, but I'm going to keep my fingers crossed. Let's jump into the first match here of day 2 between Eric and Chongjun. This is going to be extremely exciting. So the leads are going to be jumping out any second for us now. And on the battlefield, we have got Charizard paired up with the Grimmsnarl for Chongjun, and for Eric, it's going to be, oh, look at that, it's Charizard and Grimmsnarl as well. And I think Grimmsnarl is going to be the Pokemon to watch. Yeah,
and you've got to wonder what options both Grimmsnarls have. Like we've already mentioned, is there Fake Out there? Because if there is Fake Out, you can stop the opposing Grimmsnarl for at least one turn, or are they just going to go straight for speed control, the screen support? And you've also got to be a bit wary on what the items of the Charizard are. Do they hold the Charty Berry? Because Charizard does have access to the move Ancient Power, so it can max potentially and go for that attack, but we're seeing Chongjun just switch it out here just to be a bit safer, preserve it for later in this match.
Yeah, keeping the Charizard safe and sound in the back and bringing the Incineroar out into the fray. Throwing an Intimidate down, but it's not really too valid in this situation. But having that Fake Out could be useful. But Charizard's going to be slowed down right out of the blocks here by that Thunder Wave. So not only going to have its speed dropped, but has the chance for paralysis. The Grimmsnarl on Eric's side is going to go on the offensive a little bit and go for a Spirit Break, and does actually a decent chunk of damage. That's over a third on the opposing Grimmsnarl, leaving it a little bit weak and susceptible to something from this Charizard, like the Hurricane. That does connect. Not enough to pick up the KO though, but another Spirit Break is going to finish it off.
Yeah, that's a nice play here. You know, Eric taking the paralysis from that Thunder Wave on his Charizard, making it a little less effective if he does want to go for that Gigantamax with it later on in this match, in particular against something like Groudon or the opposing Charizard, because then it isn't really going to be able to get an attack off before the opposing Pokemon can potentially knock it out. So a little bit risky, and you've always got that chance of it not being able to move for a turn now, but getting the damage onto the opposing Grimmsnarl, you can see where Eric's going here. He's wanting to remove that support option from Chongjun's side of the field as soon as he can, really concentrating down on that side of the field, knowing there's no Protect here. Obviously, you've got to be aware now of the Fake Out that's present with that Incineroar. So, as we're seeing, he is going to be adjusting.
Yeah, and a similar adjustment here, Charizard retreats in favor of the Incineroar. So throwing that Intimidate down, that will be critical against the Incineroar on Chongjun's side, and apply Fake Out pressure going into this next turn. So both of the players really focusing down on that board positioning. Eric deciding to not go for another Spirit Break, deciding to capitalize on this turn and going for that Reflect, as is the Grimmsnarl on Chongjun's side. So both of them setting up their physical defenses. Very wise when you look at the two restricted pairs being physical attackers, and Incineroar is going to get in on out of there from Chongjun's side. So it's joined the field for one turn, leaving after another turn, and this does give Chongjun the perfect opportunity to bring in something from the back, like potentially the Groudon. You could apply some good damage with the Precipice Blades here.
Yeah, that's a good point. You could bring the Groudon in, and it's probably the better option than the Charizard, because if we do see the Charizard come out, we could see maybe a kind of a roles reversal of the turns here, where Eric, if he does have access to that Thunder Wave, he could go for the Thunder Wave onto Chongjun's Charizard this turn and paralyze that to set up the similar sort of situation for a late game, take on getting rid of the Charizard. But we are going to see it just leave the field straight away.
I think it heard you there, Lee, and it's like, I don't want to take a Thunder Wave. I'm going to bring Incineroar back in, and I actually quite like this kind of bait here as well, because if it is something like a Thunder Wave, Incineroar being a dark type is going to be immune to those Prankster moves. So a really nice switch in here. We're going to see another switch, actually, a double switch on Chongjun's side, and it's going to be the Groudon joining the field. So we've now got all 4 Pokemon on Chongjun's side confirmed. Zazation has been left on the bench, as well as our little Gastrodon. But I think it's a good position to have Groudon in here. Grimmsnarl's going to go for the light screen anyway, knowing that the Charizard's in the back, wants to set up the defensive measures, as Incineroar on Eric's side goes for the parting shot this time. So Lee, you can really see how these players are almost being cautious to deal out damage and then leave your Pokemon in a dangerous position for the following turn. They're really thinking turns ahead here.
Yeah, and that's the thing, you're not taking any big risks early on. You don't want to Gigantamax with your Charizard too early. You don't want to Dynamax with anything before you've got your board position set and you're kind of happy to start putting damage on the field. Very tentative first turns, just setting up their board states here from both players. So we see the Charizard hit the field again for Eric, and the Sun is now up, but that Charizard in a little bit of a trickier position now, being paralyzed, of course.
Yeah, of course, Charizard wants to use its Solar Power ability and boost up those Fire-type moves while the Sun is on the field. But in the paralyzed state, we know what I'm trying to say. Yeah. It's difficult for it, because if you Dynamax and then get fully paralyzed, you're wasting a turn of Dynamax and leaving yourself so vulnerable in the face of something like a Groudon that could be carrying, something like a Stone Edge that could then, just wipe that Charizard off the battlefield.
Yeah, that's it. But if you are Eric and you do go for the Gigantamax here, you are holding something like a Charty Berry. It gives you a little bit more security to allow you to go for that Gigantamax and try and get that Wildfire onto the field and start really that ball rolling with the residual damage,
We talked about this a lot yesterday, Lee, about that residual damage, and I think it is that high-risk, high-reward for Eric. Go for the Dynamax and get off the Wildfire if you can. Stone Edge comes out, does connect, but isn't going to be able to pick up the KO. However, the Charizard is going to be revealing it's holding the weakness policy. This has been such a shift in the metagame, and I love seeing it on the Charizard here. Parting Shot comes in and will reduce its special attack by 1 stage, I believe now leaving it at just +1. So it will still be hitting really heavy with something like the Wildfire. Yeah,
but +1 coming out onto that Groudon, it is going to be able to remove it. I don't think even an Assault Vest will be able to save the Groudon now. But there's always the risk of it being paralyzed because of that the paralysis status that it has got on it. So hopefully Eric can get an attack off as we see a Spirit Break come out from the Grimmsnarl.
Oh, nice
and
catch.
It's a really nice catch onto that Charizard to reduce its special attack, make it less effective going into this next turn.
Yeah, and Charizard breaks through the paralysis and goes for the G-Max Wildfire onto that opposing Groudon. It is a one-hit KO. Charizard just demonstrating why it is one of the most devastating Pokemon out there.
Yeah, and just taking that big threat of the Groudon completely out of the battle. And you think, okay, well, if that is the only thing I do with my Charizard here, I'm happy with that. Eric's got his own Groudon potentially in the back to come in and help him deal with the Charizard on Chongjun's side of the field, and he's got his Grimmsnarl out now to potentially disrupt Chongjun's Charizard with some sort of speed control that Eric's been subjected to already.
I mean, Charizard's if it wasn't paralyzed, it would be in such a great position here, because you don't have to worry about going for a G-Max Wildfire anymore. You've already got that set up, and it's not going to affect the fire types on the field anyway. But depending on the move pool, if it is running something like H and Power, it can go for that Max Rockfall and do so much damage to either of the Pokemon on Chongjun's side. But it is at such low HP, and it is slower thanks to that paralysis. So Chongjun's in a position to capitalize on that disadvantage and try and pick up a KO.
Yeah, that's it. And I think, if you're able to just land anything onto the opposing Charizard, it just helps you preserve a bit of health for the rest of your team. The Incineroar is not going to worry too much. Well, other than the rockfall that would come out, and it will do a lot of damage. But you do have that fake out here that we are going to see, and it will stop that Grimmsnarl from supporting with any sort of speed control this turn.
Yeah, I really like that play. You know you're going to outspeed that Charizard, so let's just stop the Grimmsnarl from getting up to any prankster tricks. But you can see how the weakness policy really benefited on Eric's side, and I believe as well there was a light screen up on that side. So able to survive the G-Max Wildfire, as the Rockfall does indeed come out, is going to overwrite the weather, but I think critically it gets the KO.
Yeah, it picks up the big knockout. The survival there on the Grimmsnarl as well, you know, just showing this, the light screen support that you said, you know, mentioned is so critical early on, allowing the Grimmsnarl to stay on the field. And then the Charizard survival as well. That's the big thing here, where it is able to get that attack off, that huge attack, and pick up a knockout in return and take the pretty much the two big Pokemon that Chongjun's going to utilize in this match for that offensive damage off the field. And Eric sitting there now, pretty happy with his Charizard, even though it is paralyzed, still on the field.
Yeah, I mean, what an amazing turnaround there for Eric. I was convinced that Charizard was going to go down if Chongjun had targeted into it, but you know, it was able to get that KO with the Max Rockfall, and a good reveal as well, you know, carrying something like that Ancient Power just to be able to deal with other Charizards that can be so disruptive makes this mirror a little bit more interesting if you have a way to deal with it. Incineroar's coming back onto the field now for Chongjun, and again, it's looking a little bit difficult. Charizard's got very dwindled HP, and these Incineroar's still looking reasonably healthy.
Yeah, and that's it. And you know, if Eric's got something like the Groudon, like we suspect in the back, it's able. You just want your Charizard to go down now. If you get any damage off onto the opposing Grimmsnarl, it's a bonus. But you kind of just want your Groudon to come in fresh, not take any damage, and then just pressure with that Precipice Blades, which should help close the game up for him at this point. It's going to be very difficult for Chongjun with very little offensive pressure on the field at the moment.
Exactly, and I think you could just see Chongjun go for the fake out. That isn't gonna work, but is maybe just thinking ahead towards that game 2. The Charizard goes for the G-Max, Max Airstream, and is going to be able to boost up the speed as well, as Foul Play will come out from the opposing Grimmsnarl here, but Charizard hanging on. I mean, things look so difficult for this Charizard getting paralyzed so early on, but it's able to have that longevity out in the field, and I have to really credit the way that Eric has been able to pivot around, you know, revealing only 3 Pokemon. We still don't know what that 4th one is hiding in the back, and to be able to pilot these 3 so expertly to work around Chongjun's team, to leave it to just this low HP Incineroar, I think shows how well versed and comfortable he is with this particular team.
Yeah, not revealing that 4th Pokemon is pivotal for Eric. You know, he doesn't want to give it any information that he doesn't need to away. So if he can close this up now without showing that Pokemon, it's going to be an advantage for him going into this if he is able to take game 1, which we assume he is. The interesting thing from that last turn, though, that I'll just point out, Lou, is that the Grimmsnarl moved after the Charizard. The Charizard was paralyzed, so indicating maybe what item is potentially on Chongjun's Grimmsnarl going into this game 2 here, as we see Eric pick up the win there, because obviously with the paralysis, Charizard's speed is really reduced. You would expect everything on the field to outspeed it, but if a Pokemon's holding something like an Iron Ball and that trick combination that we've seen on Grimmsnarl, then that's kind of indicative and something that Eric may have picked up on, that he has to be a little bit careful with going into game 2, because we've already seen the Thunder Wave, but we've never really seen too many combinations of having Thunder Wave and that kind of trick Iron Ball combination together.
Oh, that's really well identified.